skeleton keys, golden tickets, forged packs, DC sync, DC shadow. The Active Directory attack surface is expanding faster than admins can keep up with. Securing your environment begins with implementing least privilege administrative models, but does not end there. Many organizations send Active Directory syslog events to a SIM platform. However, logs are noisy, of limited scope, and are time-consuming to review and act upon. Active Directory is secure when it's clean, understood, configured properly, monitored closely, and controlled tightly. StealthBits Technologies provides solutions that monitor, secure, and detect the latest threats against Active Directory. Visit them today at stealthbits.com to learn more. Are your existing solutions able to take advantage of real threat intelligence? Common solutions like firewalls weren't designed to handle the massive and growing volume of threat indicators. This challenge often results in significant gaps in your protections, even when you think you have it covered. You need to protect yourself by filtering network traffic against unique threat indicators in a way that allows you to act. Palawall by Bandora Systems is the solution that filters over 10 million indicators right out of the box. Developed in partnership with the Department of Defense, Palawall is affordable for companies of all sizes. Get your free trial today at bandorasystems.com. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly.
And we are back. It's a two-segment episode where English is not going to serve me well today. Professor Varia has stayed with us. And remember, we're exploring the intersection of cryptography and society. We're taking a look at how the technology can inform this discussion better and looking at the broader crypto world if there's a different approach. And of course, the answer there is yes. So now we're going to shift into that policy side of the discussion. So as we do that, let me just remind you, there's some limits here to our discussion. There's some stuff here that's exciting. And in the break, we were talking about some ways that this might be used around Internet of Things and the more complex management of stuff. And that's all really exciting. So here's what just to keep you in mind, the paper that Professor Varia and his colleagues started out with listed out 3 pretty good requirements. They're captured in that first section. It's probably not the complete list of requirements. It's probably not the prioritized list of requirements. And economics are not the only pathway. It's a good way to think about it in terms of resources and time, but there's other ways to take a look at this. The purpose that we've set out for, especially in the context of this conversation, is to just stimulate some thinking on what could be possible. Maybe that leads to more research or other ways to test this. But ultimately, our goal is let's see what actually works. Or I think as Professor Varia said to me, let's build it and bash it. Let's see what works. Let's research it. Let's research some more. But ultimately, let's get into better decisions around the debates. And then on the break, Professor Varia mentioned this concept of compelled disclosure and how important that is, especially for those of us here in the U.S. Professor, we talk about compelled disclosure. Then what are we thinking about, or what do we need to think about?
Yeah, so I think one question people may have when listening to the first half of our discussion is like, why even build such a scheme that allows for law enforcement agencies to recover the contents of some but not all messages? Because right now in the U.S. we live in this world where in the U.S. in 2018, our government has no legal or technological ability to uncover the contents of pretty much all encrypted messages. But we should recognize that we're in sort of a unique, maybe not unique, but in a nice and privileged position that I'm not sure is stable and sustainable in the current format. Because number one, the current trend in the U.S. in terms of this discourse is there's a very large discussion, a very large amount of discourse in the political space about this question of compelled disclosure of key material to read the content of encrypted messages. And if the only 2 options we provide as technologists to that debate are you can read the content of all messages in principle, or you can read the content of none, then that's a very, very large but discrepancy between the two, and who knows how a political process may shake out, and it may turn into something that's very bad for us. And the second reason that this may not be super stable or something is just because we're lucky in the U.S. not to have any kind of compelled disclosure of key material law on the books, but we're not the majority in that respect. Actually, a majority of the world, or a majority of the world's internet users, live in countries whose governments actually do have laws for compelled disclosure of keys, like countries like China and India and Brazil and parts of Western Europe, etc. So we're in a pretty lucky position with the current state, but we should also be mindful and thinking about, as a technology community, how we can build other kinds of options that might be more appealing to society than, well, maybe either the current state of the world, or certainly, I think, than a world in which governments have, in principle, the ability to access all keys and therefore all information sent, over the internet or stored on your personal laptops or cell phones, etc.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably, maybe I'm not in the minority. These conversations are always interesting for me, precisely because what you said before, it's that intersection of looking at technology with, in this case, society, and looking at policy and looking at legitimate needs of all different parties and trying to figure it out. So let's talk about that. So when we talk about mass surveillance here in the United States, a lot of times we kind of look at law enforcement in terms of warrants and wiretaps, and the need to make a case, go to a judge or a magistrate, get something written up. So is that what we're talking about here then when we're talking about approximating the system as we see it in the US? Or how do you characterize it differently, Professor?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in the current state of the law, so I can't give you exactly the full description of what kinds of legal restrictions exist. But at a high level, the rules that pertain to law enforcement access to material over, say, in electronic devices over the internet, like a communication, or on your personal devices, are covered by the Electronic Communications Privacy Act and other related acts of Congress, and also governed by principles such as those in the Fourth Amendment. And they do spell out in all sorts of details which kinds of content require warrants versus a subpoena versus maybe even not even that. And the distinctions, admittedly, are something that are not as well appreciated by me and maybe much of the tech world as they are by, say, our friends in the legal community. But there are important distinctions, and what I think we should think about as technologists is what we can impose as technological barriers that are compatible with or reinforcing or in addition to any kind of legal impediment that may exist, as we may want some sort of socio-technological mix, and not just either technology trying to replace or rewrite or artificially restrict what the law might permit, which may cause a backlash, such as what the crypto wars currently seem to be, or a law that also tries to simply rewrite the way that technology works, which is also suboptimal. But really what's good is to see some sort of reinforcing mix between law and technology.
Yeah, I mean, what we like to do in this program is we love to ask the question, what problem are we trying to solve? And what I like is in the first segment, you point blank said, look, you figure out the problem and then you match the technology to it, not the other way around. And so what I've enjoyed about this process and our discussions is you're basically saying, can we emulate the current model, the way that society has embraced it, the way that it's evolved, the way that it operates today societally? Can we emulate that in technology? And it turns out that the answer is yeah. Now, I'll point out again, because I know that you've pointed this out to me a bunch. Just because we're talking about a technical way to do it doesn't mean that it's feasible, doesn't mean it's the right way, doesn't mean we've uncovered everything. But so, if we look back over history, have we seen things like this before? Is there, where there's changes in technology, there's changes in scale, there's changes in where we can locate things that have brought out these sort of widespread conversations?
Sure. So, I mean, to oversimplify, maybe to begin with, everything in technology is about moving fast and breaking things, and then everything else about the rest of society is to clean up the mess we made, right? So, to sort of reestablish whatever norms we want as a society, which is to say that whatever one believes as to what, say, in the context of the current discussion, law enforcement should or should not have as access to encrypted content. I think we can all agree, even if we don't agree on the answer to that question, at least we can all agree that that's a thing that needs to be answered collectively by society, that it shouldn't be answered single-handedly by, say, FBI Director Wray, or God forbid, definitely not single-handedly by me, and or by any other kind of technologist. That it's something that our role as technologists is to support whatever society wants and to give society the space, the breathing room to sort of think about what it wants and what it really needs, and what it what kind of balance it wants between, say, in this discussion, access by government to data versus the important individual and societal right to privacy. Um, and so, I think that this is sort of a debate that society needs to have, and that we need to sort of be thinking about how to reinforce it rather than supplanting it or imposing our own wishes.
Well, and I know you and I, we did not rehearse this deeply, but the last time we talked, I kind of threw out, I said, well, didn't we do this with safes? Because when we first
Mhm.
built safes, they were huge. They were the kinds of things that governments or very wealthy businesses and people could build. They were centrally located. I mean, I don't want to say they were impenetrable, but they were pretty good. But then we figured out how to make safes smaller, and they got to more people. And what you chimed in with then is, and we have ratings. Whether you need, what types of tools you need, what types of skills you have, how long it's rated for, and then that lets us make better decisions. So safes aren't all or nothing. They're not locked up and you can never get into it. And I would say if we go back even over the last decade of popular movies, so popular media and that reflected in current culture, there's a fair number that talk about how to break safes and how to get into safes
Mhm.
and how to go after that type of stuff. And so there's some interesting real limitations, both in terms of what you purchase and what you're buying, and then the way that we layer the protections on it. Does that feel like a decent analog then to be able to look at that? Because if we go further into it, the way that the courts have interpreted safes versus, for example, passwords so far, they're different. Like the courts have figured out how to deal with safes and compelling somebody to turn over a key versus passwords, which we're still figuring out right now.
Yeah, so I think the safe analogy is a good one for a couple of reasons. Number one, you're right that the safe community, the community of people who design physical safes, actually have a very good rating system for accurately understanding what is required in order to break the safe and what kind of adversary it can thwart. And in cryptography and even security more generally, we tend not to. We tend to say, like, oh, something is completely impenetrable. It would take someone a billion years to break it, and then tomorrow someone writes a paper showing how there's some new math trick that can break it, and we're all like, whoops, sorry. I didn't mean a billion years. I meant like 10 minutes, right? So I think there's a lesson we can learn from the safe community, both in terms of this sort of idea of a rating system, and that there is value. There is very concrete value. There's a huge market for these kinds of systems that are good, if not, but still not necessarily completely perfect. The other thing we can learn from them is the idea that this notion of the weakest link. That even if one could build a completely impenetrable safe, I'm not sure if the regulation on the safe industry, for instance, would have come about differently if that were an issue. And I'm also not sure what would have happened to the way that we would think about how to protect the keys to the safe, or the laws that pertain to the way that we protect them. That all of these questions are interrelated, and we're sort of when thinking about encryption, if we build the strongest possible encryption scheme, which sounds good, but does that mean that we've built a scheme that is not compatible with what society wants, and that society weakens its laws, or it weakens its rules about how to acquire keys to an unsafe degree in response to this unbreakable encryption, and that overall as a society we may be less better off, even if we have this completely from a math point of view, impenetrable encryption scheme, that may not necessarily be the right thing for society. Maybe the way that is better for society is to use your safe analogy, to use these, maybe we would maybe if we think of a world where in one world we have the safes that we have today, and in another world we have these magical, hypothetical, unbreakable safes, that maybe the way that laws would have come about to regulate the safe industry would be worse in this hypothetical world with strong safes, that they may not actually be the better thing for society.
What I've learned in looking at communication and stuff is that if we can give somebody an analog that they understand, it always lets us at least set parameters on the debate better. Because just listening to you there, I thought, it's interesting. We have in the US these TSA approved locks for your luggage. To be blunt, they're pretty laughable because most people have a set of the keys. But the idea was you could set whatever combo you wanted on it, but the TSA still has that master key and they can open up any of them and then theoretically close it back up. Cool. Wait, but how many people are in TSA and who has that key? And does anybody actually think that's doing anything for them? Is it right? And then we go and we look at, well, how do you manage the keys in your office building, at least before everything went to some sort
where
of
I was
controller?
going, Michael, I was thinking of it more of like a locker system. Like, I don't know if you went to like a launch trampoline park or an amusement park or even at the gym, right? You're just trying to protect something of some level of value for a specific period of time, probably knowing that somewhere that organization probably has a master key in case like someone lost their key, right? And I think that's a good example of how you manage the information you have for a specific period of time and segmenting that, public versus private versus selective kind of aspect of encryption, right? Time is certainly a factor, but is it only known to you? Is it known to the world, or is it known to some subset of people, and for how long?
Right. So I think these are all great points. So, I like the TSA lock analogy. That's a very good one. And I think, in addition to the fact that it's unfortunate that everybody has very easy access to the TSA key, I mean, that's one way that the TSA locks are broken. But I think the more interesting way that the TSA locks are broken is that once you have one of those keys, you can, in principle, if you just go to the back of an airport and you find all the luggage that is protected by these TSA locks, you can open all of them up at once. And this notion of scale is particularly important when we talk about the digital world, where, getting a computer to do something is even cheaper than getting a human to walk to the back of the airport and to open up all the bags. And your ability to attribute it is even lower, et cetera. And so what we were thinking about, Charles and I, when going about this particular paper, the writing of this particular idea, was how do we take, policing back to the 1970s? I mean, I'm using an analogy here, but to say like, to an era where there was no technology, there were no computers, et cetera, and law enforcement had to prioritize which investigations they wanted to pursue, right? You could do a stakeout, but you couldn't stake out everybody all at the same time. And, similarly, you could go look up, suppose you have a warrant, you can go look at, the contents of somebody's diary. But even if somehow magically you got a warrant for every single house in the world, or in the United States at least, all at the same time, you still couldn't actually search everybody's house and read everybody's diary because you physically wouldn't have the manpower to go to everybody's home and open things up. So that sort of sheer amount of effort that is finite that law enforcement has imposes some benefits, some privacy benefits to us that we don't necessarily think about directly, but I think and as technology has progressed, and now this ability for governments to search through data without having to have humans involved, but just doing this at wide scale, this so-called going bright discussion, that sort of has changed the equation for law enforcement. And in response, if you look at even the Carpenter decision from the Supreme Court a few weeks ago, they sort of said, wait, there's an issue here with if you can, look at location data. Well, that was the context of that particular court case. But if you can look at that for everybody all at the same time, there's a problem here. Yes, you can do a stakeout if you wish, but that's very different from being able to see every human's location data all at once for very long periods of time, because it's as if you did a stakeout of everybody all at the same time, and that was never something we would have been willing to allow. And we never had to write a rule against this in the past because there was this concrete limitation that you couldn't do a stakeout on everyone all at the same time. But now that data made it possible, now we have to change the norms and the rules to deal with the fact that this is possible. So at a high level, our entire weird puzzle system, whatever, is about changing the economics of how government accesses digital data in order to sort of move it back to the world where there is a physical cost that they have to pay per message that they retrieve, per person that they try to acquire messages from, etc. But that's just our idea. That's just our approach. Like you all have been saying, there's no reason to believe that, our paper is the best or the right or whatever metric that you want to use, the right way of solving this sort of question of how do you allow access to some but not all content. There are, I'm sure, many other ways of solving this question. And I think perhaps what's even more appealing to me than even finding one potential or a second potential answer to this question is to sort of give the tech community the space to breathe in order to try to find more solutions on their own. Because I think right now what we're concerned about as a community, and I think rightly so, we're concerned that if we propose one idea and it turns out to be bad, but we didn't know this yet, we thought it would work, and it turns out not to, then again, everything I just said about the scale of the digital world comes back to us in folds, right? If we implement one system that's a mistake, then everybody's data is all at risk all at the same time, and that's terrible. And what we've found as a cryptography community is the only way that we really know whether systems are good. We think of this as a math field. We write all these fancy equations. We have these proofs or reductions for security of our systems. But really the only way we know that it's truly good is to do things the old-fashioned way, to have a human competition, to have many pairs of eyes look at something, to really take multiple years to standardize whatever it is that we want as an approach. This is what we did for the advanced encryption standard, AES, for example, and for the secure hash algorithm, SHA-3, etc. And in order to get that, we have to be able to operate in a world where we aren't worried about the constant threat of any half-baked idea that we throw on paper becomes the norm, becomes the rule tomorrow. So I just want to use this to emphasize what you all have been saying since the beginning of the episode, which is the ideas in the paper that Charles and I have that we've been discussing today are not something that we're intending for the folks listening to this show to use tomorrow. It's instead something as food for thought that this is possible, and also to encourage people to think about other ways that are different and maybe frankly better than the way that we've proposed, and also to encourage everybody as citizens in society, whether technologists or not, to not rush to judgment about any particular solution, and to give the community time to organically decide and to sort of wade through which options can and cannot work fundamentally before we deploy something at scale that might cause problems.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea too of giving us space and breathing it. I mean, what I really enjoyed about the discussions that you and I had, and I want to point one thing out real quick because you really captured me. You said, and I think this is pretty close to a quote, much of the real discussion is stunted because everyone pumped it all the way up to 11. I love busting out "This is Spinal Tap" as often as I can. And so to have someone else use it was kind of like, yes, that's a success. But I think but listen, you added some other qualifiers I just want to remind everybody of, right? What are the trade-offs? What do we find acceptable? And I think you've said this really well. It can't be all or nothing. That's never going to be acceptable. It doesn't mean there has to be a compromise. It means going back and asking, okay, well, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? But maybe asking it of multiple audiences and then getting into an actual reasoned dialogue, right? Not a debate, not a discussion, not a shouting match, but a dialogue where we're trying to reach to some level of understanding. And I really love this idea of trying it out. So if people want to read this paper, we will put the link to the paper in the show notes. We'll put the link. You've got a fantastic blog post on Lawfare. We'll put that up there as well. Is there anything that you would love from our community? Do you want to hear from people? Is there something that we can do to support your efforts, or otherwise, keep abreast of the things that you're working on?
I think the number one thing that would be interesting for me to hear, and for anybody who's working in the space to hear from folks like your listeners, like CISOs, et cetera, is what are the kinds of requirements that are particularly important to you when you hear any kind of discussion about the question of government access to encrypted data. I hear a lot of stuff in the public discourse by both governments, frankly, and the tech community about why this is either something that must be done or can't be done, et cetera. And there are a lot of reasons that are given, and what's hard to distill through is sort of which of these requirements really, really matter and are fundamentally critical to a business, and which of these are more of the nice to haves. And that would help to sort of rank through which kinds of requirements can be met by any kind of technological system. I proposed at the beginning of this conversation 3 requirements that I thought were useful to have for a system that could permit selected access to encrypted information, which is by no means saying that these are the best 3 or even the most important 3. They were just, at least I think, a lower bound, a minimum threshold that I think those 3 requirements are almost certainly going to be important no matter what system is built and no matter how it's built, whether it's built using sort of economics and proof of work puzzles or something completely different is kind of inconsequential. Like the how is not really the interesting question here, it's the what. What kind of requirements really are business critical and what kind of requirements are not, and what kind of ordering one can prescribe to that kind of requirements list would be really interesting and informative to the so-called crypto wars debate.
I love it. Professor Varia, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly and sharing all these ideas. And I know in the breaks we got talking about blockchain and IoT and those other types of things. So if your minds went there too when you were watching us, Paul and I are already working on, we'll put together a segment on that as well. And we'll keep doing this. Let us know how this worked out for you. And in case you missed it, last week, Paul and I, through the magic of recording, explored some articles for your benefit. And then Paul had a great conversation with Edna Conway about intellectual property and practical things that you need. Next week, we've got Gary Berman joining us, and we're talking about graphic novels and the impact that they have.
Excited to get you and Gary together on the same show, Michael. It's gonna be awesome, and we're doing a special.
We're actually gonna chat in about 30 minutes too.
Nice, yeah, you're gonna like Gary a lot, I promise. And we're doing a special thing with Gary. If you come visit us in the pool areas at Black Hat and then DEF CON, so Mandalay Bay and then Caesars, we're going to be the exclusive distributors of the Cyber Hero Adventures comic book at the show, and you'll get to meet Gary. He'll be there at specific times in our booth, and it's a great reason to come hang with us at the pool area. Meet Gary and get your hands on this. If you've got family, friends, or coworkers that you think would benefit from a unique way to educate people about cybersecurity, then this is certainly the way to do it. That I thought was awesome. And Gary's a great guy, and thanks to Tom Brennan for fostering that relationship and helping Gary and getting him into the security community. And you'll see with our interviews why that's important. So,
yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that. And then next week, remember, we switched our innovation updates to monthly format, and holy cow, are we bursting at the seams. And there's some surprises in there. So we're going to break it down. We're going to give you the trends, the high levels, things to think about, including all the show notes for your need. In the meantime, you can catch me on Twitter at Catalyst, Paul's at Security Weekly. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Let us know what you thought of today's show. And remember, exceptional leaders elevate the people around them. Here's to your week of investing in yourself so you elevate the people around you. See you next week, Monday, 1 p.m.